Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome to this week's episode of the Podiatry Legends podcast. The podcast is designed to help you feel, see, and think differently about the podiatry profession. Before I get on to this week's episode, which is part 2 of why I left podiatry, and I will say, part 1 has gone unbelievably well. It's probably been the fastest downloaded podcast for a long time, and I've also received a lot of comments and feedback from people. So, obviously, this topic about why people have left podiatry is really important. I think it's something we need to keep the conversation going well after this podcast or these 2 podcast episodes. Before I get on to it, though, I just want to remind everybody that I do have a YouTube channel. Just look for Tyson E. Franklin, Podiatry Advisor and Mentor. And that's where I upload a lot of videos from my podcast and also other videos that's got business and marketing advice and just other tips in general. So go and check it out. Tyson E. Franklin, Podiatry Advisor and Mentor. So going to get on to 2 more interviews today. And then after those 2 interviews, I'm going to then wrap up the 2 episodes with my own thoughts based on some of the notes that I took from the 5 people that have been guests. So let's get on to the first guest. Okay, so with me now is Chris Kenny. So Chris, how you doing?
Very well. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to come on and share a few thoughts around why I left podiatry, which is the name of this particular episode. But so just to get started, when did you actually graduate from podiatry and where did you do your study?
I did my podiatry degree down at Campbelltown in Sydney, in the UWS. I finished up in 2004.
How many years did you stay in the profession for?
Well, I think I left podiatry and officially started my carpentry apprenticeship in 2017.
Okay.
So, yeah, there was probably close to 13 years or so thereabouts in podiatry.
Right. Okay. So, what was the why carpentry for starters? Like, did you always have an interest in that?
Yeah, I've always been a sort of a hands-on person. That's probably why I chose podiatry as a health.
Yeah.
Because I still do like health. But podiatry was one of those things that I thought I can use my hands. I can be a little bit creative. So far as with the orthotics and also just our hands-on work that we do as podiatrists. But I suppose the real catalyst was I had a practice down in Sydney. And I moved premises, and at the time, my father-in-law, he said, "Mate, I'll come down, give you a hand." I had to put up a few walls and swing a door and that sort of thing. And after I'd done all that with him and helped him out, sort of was his apprentice.
Yeah.
And I started taking my first patients. I realised I wanted to be doing, building walls rather than doing feet.
So you went from high school straight to podiatry then?
Yes. Yeah.
Was podiatry your first choice?
It was.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I suppose that there was also that. I went to a private boys' high school. I think the norm was to go to university. That was just sort of what was told to us. We were meant to do that.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't spoken, it was sort of felt. And when your folks sort of pour a few dollars into your education, you sort of feel that obligation to do the right thing by them and get a higher education and be an outstanding citizen and all that sort of thing. But yeah, if had my time again, I probably would have gone straight into a trade because I just enjoy them.
So you graduated, did podiatry, obviously went and worked for someone for a few years. Was it a good experience where you actually worked? Was it a good experience?
Absolutely. I worked for, I don't know if I can say the name.
If it was positive, if it was a positive experience, I don't mind you saying the name.
I worked for Ride Podiatry under Robert Mayer.
Okay.
So one of the sort of the long-standing people in podiatry, and he was absolutely brilliant to work for. And as a young podiatrist coming through, he if there was ever any issues or anything I didn't know or needed someone to lean on, he was always there to help me out and guide me through those daunting couple of first months and years as when you're getting into it. But after a couple of years there, I went overseas for a few years just to have a bit of fun and do the backpacking thing, and lived in London for a few years.
So you worked in the UK as a podiatrist?
I did, yeah. Worked in a little private practice there, which was great because obviously the money's not too bad in podiatry, and it certainly helped me travel. And my then girlfriend, now wife, we had a great time.
Was she a podiatrist as well?
No, she's a teacher. I wouldn't do that to myself.
So, well, so far through your career though, through uni, your first 2 jobs, going overseas and all, everything was really positive. Then you've gone and set up your own business.
Yes.
And what happened? What
Look,
was the turning point?
I think it was even when I was working for Ride Podiatry under Robert. There were moments where I thought, have I made the right choice? Certainly, the support was there, which made me feel good, and that experience was fantastic. But sort of pretty early in the piece, the writing was on the wall that this is a bit boring. I really didn't like the same conversation 20-something times a day with another lady named June or Jane.
Yeah.
It just became one of those things. It was just exceptionally repetitive.
Were you doing much biomechanical work, or were you doing a lot of general?
I was doing a little bit of biomechanical, but a lot of GTs. And when I did set up my own practice, it became a GT clinic, and that's probably where I made a big mistake.
Did it become a GT clinic because did you feel you lost some of your biomechanical skills because you weren't doing a lot of it?
I did, and I think I had lost a little bit when I was over in London. They very much have the chiropody, whatever you want to call it, mindset where someone would come in, or you'd have a patient sitting in front of you, you're doing a GT, and they'll say, I've got heel problem or this pain or whatever. Oh, but you wouldn't know anything about that. You're just a chiropodist or chiropodist. And so that really sort of stumped me for a while, and I think.
Did that ruin your confidence at all, or your self-esteem, or?
Yeah, it just I thought, what am I doing here? Am I just a GT podiatrist? Is this what I'm going to do for the next 30, 40 years until I can retire? And unfortunately, the answer was yes, unless I made a change.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's other friends of mine that I graduated with who have angled themselves towards that. And hats off to him. He and he angled himself towards. He always wanted to do podiatry, but a GT-free podiatry practice, and he's achieved that, and he's having a great time and a great career. And had I had my time again, I probably would have enjoyed it if I did something more like that, as he has done. But
so you had your private practice, you set it up. It became very much a GT clinic. Is that a beer you're drinking? Damn it! I should have brought one too.
Oh, you're mad at me. I've got a water here too.
Press pause and I was going to get one. So it ended up developing into a GT clinic. So it was just that repetitive, constant work. Did you just think, this is all I'm going to be doing? Your skills had sort of fallen down a little bit?
Oh, look, I still had biomechanical patients coming through.
Yeah.
But I suppose I didn't really do enough advertising for that.
Okay.
I sort of just relied on word of mouth, and I had quite a nice little practice. It was going quite well. Financially, it was doing all right and ticking over. But I did have those times where I thought, what am I doing here? This is.
So was there a certain point? Was there a certain day or a patient or a moment that you went, now is the time I have to do it now? Did someone come along and want to buy the business? Was there something that pushed you?
Well, from a family point of view, we had our second child, and we were living in a small apartment in Sydney.
Yeah.
And that's why we thought, things are getting a little bit too dear here. What can we afford? And my wife being from she's a Coffs Harbour girl, Coffs Harbour region, we thought we'd already bought a place up here as an investment, and then we thought we might as well move into it.
Okay.
And I found a buyer for the practice, and that was the moment that I knew I'd have to go and do something different.
So once you sold the practice, that was it? You didn't end up working again as a podiatrist?
I did. I was very fortunate. I had actually probably the best part of my podiatry career. I spent about, best part of 9 years going up to Tennant Creek in the middle of Australia, about 500 k's north of Alice Springs. I did that 2 weeks out of every 2 months, so 6 visits a year.
Yeah.
Going to the community up there, and that was very enjoyable. On the other side of that, it was financially very beneficial, and once I'd started my apprenticeship, which we all know you don't get paid all that well as an apprentice anything, I was still able to do that. My boss was happy to let me go, and he knew that
that's good.
That was the way that I could support my family, rather than on the crappy $21 an hour or whatever it was back in those days.
So you finish your apprenticeship, and so you're a carpenter now?
Yes.
Are you a happy carpenter?
I'm a happy carpenter. Yeah, I love my work.
Are you
Yeah,
working with
it's
somebody else, or did you set up your own business?
I just started my own business. I've just started that. Until now, I've sort of just been working with other builders, and honing those skills and just getting that confidence up. Because when you're 34, was I 34, 35, maybe 30, yeah, thereabouts when I started, it takes that little bit more confidence, a little bit more time to get that confidence up. Sorry. Um, and you got these young blokes who are just full of confidence.
Yeah.
probably too much too soon. So it's just over these last couple of years since I've been signed off working for other people, but now it's time to do my own thing.
Okay, so is there anything about podiatry that... So the good part with what you're telling me is you weren't bitter and twisted towards podiatry. You didn't have a really negative experience. You just found the profession for you a bit repetitive and a bit boring.
It was boring. I was bored out of my brain. I was, and it was, like I said previously, it was one of those things where I thought, is this it? Is this my life?
Yeah.
For the next 30 years?
But what's interesting, what you're saying though, is you could have stayed in for the money, because you were saying that the money was fine, but it was the boredom outweighed what you were getting paid. So I think anyone who's an employer who's listening to that, if you're boring your employees shitless, then it doesn't matter what you're paying them. If the job is really boring,
not at all,
they're going to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, maybe not. That was just me. I was one of I am that person who thought, well, no, I'm not going to hang out here just for the paycheck.
Well, I'm not saying they're going to leave podiatry. They might just leave that job and then stay in podiatry, but just go and work for somebody else. Where even just a change sometimes, well, they say it changes as good as a holiday.
Exactly. Yeah, but I was definitely bored. I think there was definite sort of parts of depression sneaking in as well, just because of the repetitive nature and the not really enjoying it that much. And I think it was affecting me personally and my my role as a father as well and as a husband. So it was time to sort of also for mental health make that change.
Yeah, no chance you ever going back?
Look, never say never.
Are you still registered, or have you?
Yes. This is the last year. I've been registered, and it was actually the pandemic that ruined it for me, because I was still doing the Tennant Creek thing, and I had planned on continuing to do that because I really liked that role. It was wonderful, and it was being there for roughly a quarter of the year every year. I had sort of a second. It was a second home for me. So it was wonderful, and obviously when the pandemic started, they had to cut me loose from there.
Oh, right, okay. Because I used to go up to Thursday Island. Used to go up for, was it every month I'd go up there for 4 days. And absolutely loved it. It was so much fun going up there. It was just different because it was a completely different environment, different group of people. Yeah. And even though, it sounds funny, there were a lot of high-risk feet, which I don't like high-risk feet. And everybody knew that, but I just enjoyed the trip that much. I said, you know what, I'll just suck it up. Yeah. And then eventually they got a podiatrist. I kept encouraging, you should have a podiatrist full-time here. With what you pay me to fly me out, pay me as a private practitioner, I said, that what you pay me, you can have someone full-time.
Absolutely.
And so I did myself out of a job. They found someone full-time and gave me the boot.
But you know what? That's best for the community as well.
It was.
And there were people up in Tennant Creek who were a little bit dirty that I was coming and going because the job should be for someone from Tennant Creek. They're all about Territorians up there, and I get that. I totally agree with that sentiment. However, I said, well, when you do find someone from Tennant Creek, or you do find someone that's happy to come from Alice Springs, cut me loose, absolutely. But there was no one willing to go, so I was it.
What you've told me has been different to the experiences that other people have had, which is why I wanted to put this episode together. Because it's good that your experience in podiatry was actually quite positive, but it was just the boredom side of things that
it was thoroughly boring. That was ultimately it. I mean, like I said, it got me sort of where I wanted to be. It got me around the world. It got me a few dollars in the bank. It got me a couple, nice little investment. But ultimately, it was just I realised that it was time to go.
No,
and the geographical move up to Coffs Harbour just made sense.
I'd rather be in Coffs Harbour than Sydney.
Oh yeah. At the time, I thought we made the wrong choice, but it's
no, you made the right.
Not a bad little way of life up here.
Yeah, no, it's great. So, Chris, thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure, Tyson.
So once again, I think Chris's story was a little bit different to some of the other ones that were on part one, but I will dig into this a little bit more towards the end. So now we're on to the fifth and final interview in this particular episode. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Okay, with me now is David Kidd. He was recommended to me from another podiatrist who said that his story would be very valuable for this particular episode. So David, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, Tyson.
Firstly, thank you for joining me on this Why I Left Podiatry episode. And this has been, what's really funny, I've actually really enjoyed getting some insight into why people have left. So first question for you is, where and when did you graduate?
I graduated in 1994. Oh, that was the year I finished.
Yeah.
At La Trobe University in Melbourne.
Okay. Now, my next question is, was podiatry your first choice?
Yeah, it was, definitely.
It's amazing. Everybody so far, podiatry has been the first choice. And I actually thought the common thread was going to be podiatry wasn't their first choice. So this has actually been interesting. So how many years did you practice before you decided to give it away?
I practiced from 95 all the way through to 2006.
Okay, that was a fair run, good 11-year run doing it.
Yeah.
What were your first couple of jobs like?
It was really the first job I got, I moved to a rural town.
Yeah.
And for 12 months, and I still live there now, 20 odd years later.
Can we say where that is?
Beechworth, northeast Victoria.
Okay. Oh, Beechworth, that's where the bakery is.
Yeah, and it's interesting with the younger generation now. It's the town's more famous for its brewery now.
Okay.
Bridge Road breweries. So it certainly brings a lot of the sort of 20-somethings to 35s.
Okay, so your first job was in Beechworth.
It was in the town itself. It was a very unusual situation. It was a small town of 3,000 people.
Yeah.
And it had 6 full-time podiatrists.
Wow, that is amazing.
So the deal was back then was that it provided a regional service across all of northeast Victoria.
So was there a lot of driving around that you were doing?
Yeah. Everything from, Corryong, Wangaratta, Benalla, Bright, Mount Beauty, Myrtleford, Wodonga. So all over the northeast.
So how many years did you stay there?
I was there till about 2000.
Okay.
1999, 2000. Then moved into working privately for a while, and then moved out of that back into community health.
So your first job wasn't a private job; it was a community health job.
No, it was a public health job.
Oh, right, okay. That explains having so many podiatrists and so much driving around.
Yeah. So it was a public health job, and then did some private work. And then got an offer to go back to community health.
Yeah.
In Wangaratta, based in Wangaratta. But what happened there is where everything started to change from the podiatry angle. That's what I was going to ask.
At what point did it start going a bit sour or south?
When I was at the community health service, that's when things started to change, mainly because of the services that I was providing across the rural areas. I was getting some interesting feedback from some of the people that I was seeing. And one in particular was the farmers, as in some of the men who came through. And one in particular, just one day just struck me, and he had diabetes, and he was seeking some information on his diabetes from the local fuel and farm supply agent.
All right,
and
okay.
That blew my mind, and I thought, what is going on here? And he said, well, I trust him. So, and he's got diabetes, so he'll tell me what he's up to and what's good for diabetes. So that sort of got me thinking about, okay, what's going on here? So I ended up doing some research and teamed up with some people from Melbourne Uni, and we did some research on diabetes in men, and found out a few things about how they operate, and then really got me into men's health and working with men. So
okay, so that was
started changing the direction.
So it was like that one comment just started to like guide you down a different path.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So what is it that you actually do now? Because nobody told me, the person that recommended you did not tell me what you're actually doing now.
I work for an organisation called the Institute of Healthcare Improvement, which is a US-based health improvement organisation based in Boston in the US. And I am working with their Asia Pacific team here in Australia and working with our partner organisation at the moment, which is Safer Care Victoria. And I'm assisting them to roll out a framework for care for older people in hospital called Age-Friendly Health Systems.
So you've been doing that since 2006, since you left?
No, only recently. I went from 2006.
Because that was a long time. 2006 was a long time ago.
Yeah. I was in community health up until then.
Yeah.
But was in community health and went sideways in community health and ended up being in management and running men's health programs, and also developed a men's behaviour change program for men.
Was that by choice? Violence. Was that by choice, or was that purely by promotion that you got moved across?
Well, it was really around me going to the leadership and saying these things are going on around men's health, and so they said, well, why don't you do something about it? So they gave me an open opportunity to pursue some men's health work, and family violence came up as one of the issues.
Yeah.
And so in partnership with the family violence organisations in the area, we pulled together so there was a women's refuge and a women's support service. We pulled together a men's behaviour change program, and one of the first. There was a couple in the state at the time, but one of the earlier ones. Yeah.
So it wasn't a defining moment in podiatry. You went, I've had a gutful of this, I'm throwing it in and I want out. So it was like it's just a set of circumstances. Certain doors opened and you just moved across.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, the way I describe it is stepping stones.
Yeah.
They literally were just stepping stones. You know, these guys, these farmers sort of spark some thoughts with regards to, well, why is this happening? Why are you not seeking healthcare from health professionals? And they go to the guy. If they got sick sheep, they go up to this guy and he tells them what's going on too. So they trust him, and that's what it was. It's like they didn't understand the health system. They didn't know who to trust. But if this guy told them go and see X, Y, and Z, then they would know. And so that really sparked a lot of interest in me as to why men work the way they do. And it's, a lot of it is around, for these guys, it was around trust and understanding. So that referral was worth a lot to them. And so I went from there, went into men's health. And then we had a few major bushfires up this way too. So I ended up in bushfire and drought recovery as well, working with men. We had one particular area north of a town called Mount Beauty where there was a very high suicide rate after 2003 fires. And we did a lot of work with the community there. And so I ended up working a lot in bushfire recovery too, with farmers, with men.
So once you moved away from podiatry, was there a point there where you thought, I may go back? Or was it after 12 months you thought, no, I'm never going back?
I was registered for years afterwards.
Yeah.
But hadn't practiced.
How many years? How many years did you stay registered for afterwards?
I can't remember exactly, but it would have been probably 8 years.
Was there a reason you didn't burn that bridge?
It was a bit of a loss of identity, I think.
Okay.
It was like I always had this thing to fall back on, because with the work I was doing, it was very much, it's actually an interesting study in self, really. But just having that sort of identity that was associated with being a podiatrist or having a profession, because with the men's health work, it was very loose with regards to what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so I was I moved to another health service there and was running their primary health team and their allied health team. And I had my registration there for a while, but then in the end, it was like, it wasn't worth it.
So as you moved away from podiatry and you moved into the new area of men's health, were you still doing podiatry a little bit on the side and then gradually worked out of not doing podiatry at all, or was it like you jumped from one stepping
Yeah.
stone to the next?
It definitely, when I was sort of back in the earlier days, went through and did a little bit of podiatry here and there up until about 2006. My wife is also a podiatrist. She set up a podiatry business in just 2005-ish. And my daughter was born in 2006, and it was really for the first 6 months that she was here that I did my last bit of podiatry, and then after that I was purely just in health management.
So is your wife still a podiatrist?
Yep, certainly is.
Okay, and is she happy?
Yeah, loves it. Absolutely loves it.
And that's good. And that was the funny part is, as I'm talking to people, like I'm doing these multiple interviews, everybody has got a different story, which is sort of changing my thinking about why people actually left. So this is really good.
Again, I think with all of this stuff and like where I've gone to, it's very much around what spins your wheels.
Yeah.
And what's happened with me, with my career, has definitely been, it's stepping stones. I did a Churchill Fellowship a couple of years ago. I went to the US and had a look at this framework around older people, because I started managing an allied health team in a regional hospital. I was quite surprised at the number of older people in the hospital as a ratio of population. And so was looking for better ways to improve care for older people. Ended up grabbing a Churchill Fellowship, went to the US and looked at this framework. And that's now how I'm working in the area I'm working in now. I'm working for the organisation who actually developed the framework.
Yeah, and you were able to then go back to Beechworth?
Yeah, so I've been living in Beechworth the whole time.
Okay, so I take it your wife's practice is in Beechworth as well?
No, she practices in Wangaratta, Benalla and Mansfield.
Okay, how far is that? I have no idea of
Half an
geography
hour.
down there. Oh, half an hour. Okay, that's not too bad. So that's just down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, literally.
when you're talking country areas, half an hour is just down the road.
It's about 40 kilometres each way, but half an hour's drive.
Yeah.
Really. It's not that much. I mean, it's normal commute. For many people that live in a lot of those rural towns, it's not an issue. Sitting on 100K the whole way, it's easy.
I got one last question for you. Would there have been anything that I could have done if we knew each other that could have kept you in the profession?
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking of before. It really is around what spins your wheels. It's around what are your values? What do you value about the job? What is it that the job or that podiatry provides for you? And most people in healthcare are there because they want to make a difference.
Yep.
And so if you can keep fueling that, and people really get that sense of being able to contribute and make a difference, I think that's the easiest way to keep them.
That was a really, really good point you made then too. Because like you said, it's what spins your wheels, what floats your boat. And if the majority of people get into healthcare because they want to help people, if they're in a job where they feel like they're doing the same thing day in, day out, they're not really helping anybody, then I can understand your switch to men's health, because once again, you felt you were helping people.
Absolutely. I'm still doing it. I'm rolling out a framework across the state now.
That makes total sense.
Looking after older people in hospital, stopping them from deconditioning. Absolutely. If people really stick to their values, what really is important to them, they'll always find that real connection. Yeah, absolutely.
That is awesome advice. So, David, I want to thank you for coming on here and just sharing part of how you got into podiatry and why you left and what you're doing now. This has been great.
Absolute pleasure. Anytime, Tyson.
Okay, thank you very much.
To chat about this stuff.
Yeah. Okay, well, there you have it. That is the last interview of the 5 of why I left podiatry. And what I thought I'd do now is a bit of a summary on my takeaways from these 5 short interviews and some of the opinions that I had beforehand that have slightly changed, which I think is quite interesting. So as I was listening to each of the recordings, I took some of my own notes. So I'm going to run through them and highlight some of the things that I think are really important from each of the people that spoke, or each of my guests. And what I want to really point out too, I'm not saying that their opinion or what I'm about to say is correct and is gospel. Everybody will have their own opinion on what people say about why they've left the profession, and whether they're right or wrong isn't really important. I think what's important from all this is that we learn from it. That you might learn something, that there's a reason there why you should leave the profession. But what I want to do is keep podiatrists in the profession. I don't want anybody leaving. So I'm just going to run through. So the first guest that I had that we kept anonymous, and I asked him if podiatry was his first choice. Now, this surprised me that every person I had as a guest said that podiatry was their first choice. And why that surprised me is because I've had so many guests that have been on the podcast who have mentioned that podiatry wasn't their first choice. So I thought, are people leaving because it wasn't their first choice? They were a little bit frustrated, and that's why they left. But to my surprise, podiatry was their first choice. The other part that was interesting about that is I then went back and asked a few of them what was their second choice. And some of their second choices, some were sort of still in healthcare and some were completely different. So I was trying to see if there was a correlation between that as well. Some people, even though on this podcast I had 5 short interviews, I also spoke to some other podiatrists outside of this who have left the profession who didn't want to come on the podcast. And I just want to point out some of those people, the reason they said they didn't want to come on is because one person in particular said they had such a bad experience with their employer that it would bring up so much anxiety they didn't want to talk about it, which I think is really, really sad. And it's not the first time I've heard that, where a employer has been overbearing, has been rude, has been abusive. So I just thought I'd just throw that in there. Now, back to the first guest. He said that he had good mentoring and he actually liked his employer. Now, out of the 5, I think most of the people actually said the same thing, that they actually had good mentoring and they did like the people that they were working with. But one thing that really stood out to me with the first guest was he was being forced to see about 20 patients a day with 20-minute appointments. And he did feel that there was a big mental drain, and the workload was really hard, going from a student who was probably only seeing a couple of patients in a session, if you were lucky, through to being thrown in the deep end with a massive workload. And also the variety of patients going from one thing or another to another, which I thought would be quite interesting for a new graduate, that you'd have all this variety. And I have heard people say that's what they love about podiatry. But it was interesting that he felt that so much variety all the time was actually creating more of a mental strain. So I think that was really important. He also went on to say that he then found a new employer, once again, was a good mentor, good employer, and he was allowed 30-minute appointments. So he was allowed a little bit more time, which was great. But he found that patients just unloading their problems on him all the time was quite draining. And I just think this is something that we really need to address with our new graduates coming out. We need to ease them into the workload of private practice. And I've mentioned before that I did a podcast called Understanding Biomechanics by Playing the Guitar. And if you haven't listened to that episode, go and find it and have a listen to that podcast. And I've sort of, in my head, I've updated. If I was doing that again, I would do it differently. So that's a talk for another day. But I just think it's really important for us to understand the new graduates, they haven't been seeing the amount of people that we are used to seeing. And in our heads, I know we're thinking we need them just to start working. We need them to be profitable. But there's a right way and a wrong way of actually doing this. So the other thing he went on to say that I thought was really important, there was a lot of unpaid overtime. So there was time he was spending after work doing adjustments, whether it was doing clinic notes. There was a lot of time he was traveling, up to 50 minutes, I think it was, to different clinics. Now, I know when I had people working with me, their travel time to go to certain clinics was included in their work hours. So I can understand how you could look at that as going, this is a bit unfair. Well, I have to travel 50 minutes one way and 50 minutes back again, and I'm not getting paid for that. That's a big chunk out of my day. So maybe that was something that wasn't negotiated or was not talked about when he first actually started working there. And then he felt that there was more money in public government sector than there was working as a podiatrist. Now, I think as an employee, I know this has been a question that's come up a lot lately, but how much should podiatrists get paid in first year, second year, and as they go through? And then after a number of years, how much should they get paid? And I'll tell you right now, as an employee, yes, there probably is a bit of a ceiling on how much money you can make. But as an employer, if you decide to have your own business, well, the sky is really the limit. It's up to you on how you build your business. So I know as a podiatrist and being a business owner, I made far more than I would ever make working for any government department. So, but I can understand in the first couple of years as an employee, yep, you probably could make more money elsewhere. This takes me back to one other thing though. What I found was really interesting that you'll notice is all the people that said that they left podiatry for whatever reasons, none of them actually mentioned at the beginning, I left because the money was no good. They left for a multitude of other reasons. Then, yes, they were making more money in other areas, but none of them actually said, oh, I didn't like the money I was getting paid, so therefore I wanted to find another job that paid me more. There was all these other issues that were going on. So I think it is really, really important to remember. It's not always about what you're paying people. There's so many more aspects to it. So if we move on to Dave Taylor, who is my second guest, and one thing I thought was really interesting that he said was that there was a lot to take in as a first-year graduate. And now he came over from the UK, so yeah, our systems might be a little bit different, but I sort of get the hang of that now, or I sort of understand what he means. That when a new graduate starts, it's not just learning how your clinic runs and then applying what they've learnt at university in theory and then trying to use it in a practical instance in a clinic. But when you look at all the different item codes and all the different government departments that you may work with and the different types of materials that you may have in your clinic compared to what they were using at university, or a restriction of materials. I know at uni sometimes we had access to so much stuff, but then in a private clinic, you don't always have the unlimited budget to just blow money on different materials. So I thought that was a really good point, that not only is it working with patients, getting used to working with patients, it's also taken on the other things that you need to learn, and also working with other team members if you haven't done that before. Now, David Taylor did mention he had a great admin team who really helped him out, which was great. What I thought was interesting with David when he made his comments, though, that he sort of enjoyed when he was working in private practice compared to working for a non-profit, he found that there was far less stress working for a non-profit organisation because he didn't have to worry about could a patient afford it or not afford it. And there was no scrutiny from the boss about, are you doing the right things? So I think for some podiatrists who graduate, some people are better suited to non-profit or community health or government type employment in podiatry, and maybe private practice is not sort of the area that you should be working in. And he also mentioned that he felt his employers were really just slapping him about all the time about KPIs and statistics and his figures, and were really coming down on him quite hard. And from what I could figure out, he did work for a corporate podiatry clinic. Now, I think if you're a caring podiatrist and you really care 100% about your patients, I think you've got to look at your values and the values of the person that you're working for, and you've got to try and align yourself with a practice or a business owner that is more into that caring side of things. And I don't think, even though a corporate podiatry clinic may say that, oh no, we care about our patients, I also believe that they also care about shareholders and profits. So that is why they may be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to the KPIs. But I think there was a big problem between the employee, or maybe David, understanding KPIs, and I don't think it's all his fault though. I think it's also the employer not explaining it properly. The idea of KPIs in a business and being a business owner, I wanted to use KPIs not to tell someone that, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. I wanted to use it for training. I wanted to use it to help them get better, not make them feel bad about what they're actually doing. So I actually think sometimes the employee may not understand what KPIs are used for, how they're used, because the employer has not explained it properly. And I think some employers don't even understand the benefits of KPIs. They're not there to point out people's shortfalls. They're there to help with training and constantly improve their ability to work with patients. And sometimes if things aren't going really well between an employee and your patients, or they're not doing exactly what should be happening, sometimes you'll find it's just a communication breakdown. But it's sometimes trying to explain things to patients doesn't come naturally. And one other thing that he did mention too that I thought was really important, we was talking about the clinic that he was working at, they micromanaged everything. That they they were scrutinizing every single thing that he did. So I just think if you're an employer, you need to communicate with your employees. You need to have a really good understanding of your expectations and their expectations. And for anyone who's talking to an employer, I think you should be interviewing your employer as much as they are interviewing you as an employee to become part of that team. And if I was an employee now and I was going to work somewhere, what I would be doing is going to the employer and asking them, out of curiosity, why did you get into podiatry? And find out what their answer is. Why did they get into podiatry? And I think as a business owner, sometimes we need to remember, why did we get into podiatry? Because you'll find a lot of people that are in podiatry or in healthcare are caring people, and they cared about patients and they cared about outcomes. But sometimes as the business is bigger, you can sometimes lose track of that. So as an employee, I think it's a really good question to ask your employer. Why did you get into podiatry? And get them to talk about it, and get them to open up and remind them why they got into podiatry. And I think if you can get them talking about that, you may find, okay, this is definitely the place I want to work. And if things are not going along the lines that they said, that what they told you, you can bring it back and say, excuse me, but when I started working here, you told me that this is why you got into podiatry. And sometimes, like I said, business owners, we need to be reminded. One last thing that David said I think was really important was when he mentioned that he would be scrutinized by his employer, and David actually said, yeah, but sometimes the patient would tell me something about they had financial hardship and I wouldn't put it in the notes. The employee didn't understand. That's why I didn't explain orthotics to them. If that's happening to you as a new graduate, a new employee, if a patient tells you they can't afford something, write it in the notes. Because therefore, if the employer does say, hey, why didn't you offer orthotics to this patient? At least you can say, the patient told me this, and it's in the notes. But I still think you should always offer the best treatment to every patient unless they decide, and unless they tell you, I'm sorry, but I cannot afford that. Then you come up with other options. But if you've offered it to them, write it in your notes, write down that the patient said no. So therefore, if the employer does come down on you and say, why didn't you do that? You can go, hey, refer to the notes. The third guest that I had was Kerry Tull over in the USA. Once again, podiatry was her first choice, and she chose podiatry because she wanted a job that was a 9 to 5, and there wasn't going to be a lot of after hours and call out, which I've often said about podiatry. Best thing, why I did podiatry, because no one ever dies and everything can wait till tomorrow. Now, I said that once before, and a few people going, oh yeah, but what about these people, high risk patients? And yes, there are things that can go wrong and there can be complications, but not with the patients that I'd see because I didn't treat high risk feet. The one thing that I really took away from the conversation with her was how much and why she got into podiatry in the first place. She was, right from day dot, a caring person and wanted to actually help patients. She mentioned that as time went on, initially she found podiatry very, very rewarding, but eventually she got really tired with having to dot every I, cross every T, insurers sort of guiding where podiatry was going, and all of a sudden you were doing twice the amount of work to make the same amount of income. A lot of podiatrists, and you'll know that over the years, some podiatrists have shortened their time with each patient because of paperwork and because of all the bureaucracy and stuff you've got to go through and hoops you've got to jump through, that they're shortening the time to try and make the same amount of money. And that started to play on Kerry's mind a little bit, that yeah, it used to be a noble profession to be in the healthcare industry. It was very noble, but now they were being overworked and things were just getting really, really complicated. She also mentioned that in business, you're almost forced to become, it's like a popularity contest. And we're actually all getting sucked in to that broken system. When she said that to me, I went, oh my God, I think you're right. because you could picture an area like I'm in Cairns, and you might have 6, 8, 10 podiatrists, and it really is about who is the most popular podiatrist, who can market themselves the most and stand out the most. Now, I still think you need to back that up with really good treatment and really good patient care, but it has become a bit of a popularity contest. So she moved out of podiatry and got into health coaching, where she now feels that she is helping people and she feels it's more rewarding. So we move on to the fourth guest, which was on this particular episode, Chris Kenny. This was quite interesting that he had his own practice. He actually had his own practice. And what I thought was really important, what he said, is because he went to a private school, he felt there was pressure that he had to go to university. And I don't know if anyone's listening to this who you've got into podiatry because you felt pressured that you had to actually do something. But if I think back to my own time when I was finishing high school, and I've mentioned this story on podcast before, that my brother was doing dentistry. And I initially was going to be an art teacher. And the reason that I didn't end up doing that is my brother said to me, oh, well, why don't you do something in the health field? Therefore, you'll never be unemployed and you'll always make great money. And there's a bit more to that story, which is how I ended up in podiatry and not becoming an art teacher. Not that it was really expected that I had to go to university, but I did make a career shift based on what was sort of expected from my brother in one way or another. Chris did mention that he worked for a little bit in the UK, and when he did work over there, he lost some of his biomechanical skills because he was working in NHS, he was working in areas where he wasn't getting to use everything that he was trained. Now, this is a super important point. If you're employing people right now, and they've come out of university, they've been out 1 or 2 years, and they're working for you, and all you have them doing is doing home visits, nursing homes, only general patients in your clinic, and you're not allowing them to use their broad range of skills that they were taught at university, you are harming them and you're harming the profession. That's my opinion. If you don't like it, I don't care. Because I've spoken to other people about this, and this is something that when we graduate, we need to use all their skills. And the only way we're going to get better is by using all our skills. So he did mention that once coming back from the UK, then having his own practice, he felt the writing was on the wall because he was doing more routine foot care and not doing any biomechanical stuff. And he started to feel it was getting a little bit boring and a little bit repetitive. But he did have friends who had set up purely biomechanical clinics, and they were going really, really well. And he sort of mentioned that if he had his time over again, maybe he would have gone down that path a little bit more, and maybe it would have been more interesting. But just the boredom set in. And then once the boredom set in, he started to feel, he said, maybe I was feeling a little bit depressed as well. So he made a complete different shift out of podiatry. So my last guest was David Kidd. His first job was in a rural area. He moved backwards and forwards between private work and community work. And he did that a couple of times. He was in a very, very small area. But he just started to get a little bit sour with not just podiatry, but when he mentioned that there was that negative comment from a farmer, and he just felt that here he was an educated person, he's trying to help this person, but this farmer is actually taking advice from a supplier because he trusted him more. And that sort of sent him into a bit of a sideways move when he mentioned to his boss what was going on. They said, well, you do something about it. So he did. And what I think is really interesting about that comes back to what Kerry told about moving into an area of health coach management, because she feels like she was doing more, it was more rewarding helping those people in that way. And to me, I think David Kidd has done exactly the same thing. There was somebody who said when most people get into healthcare to help people, and you want to feel that you're actually contributing in some way, it's not just about making money. And employers have got to find things with their employees that spin the wheels, float the boat, that actually get them excited. And this comes back to the communication, I think, right at the beginning, where employers need to talk to employees, what do you love most about podiatry? And ask them that on a regular basis. And also remember why they got into podiatry. And you've both got to be happy with what you're doing. And I really think values have got to align between the employer and the employee. In my 12-week Podiatry Business Reboot, one of the first things I spoke about in week 1 was all about aligning your values, is making sure that your team has similar values to yourself, and that's the only way you're going to grow your business down the track. Like I said, no one left because they said the money was no good. I think that's really important. One thing they did say is there was a lack of job satisfaction and they didn't feel like they were making a difference in any way. They were doing the same thing day in, day out, and not really feeling like they were contributing or making a major difference. And they felt overworked, and they also felt undervalued, which I think is really important. It's one of those things you've got to weigh up if you want to work for a bigger clinic. So I'm saying just like one big solo practice, but if you're looking at an employer who might have 2, 5, 10 clinics around the place, more than likely the business side of them is extremely important. And I used to have multiple clinics, so I understand that mentality. Then you've got the big corporates, which are bigger again. But you may find that you are better aligned with a podiatrist who's just a solo practitioner who's needing one other person to actually work with. Like I said, this comes back to your values. If you want to make a change in your current situation, before you even think about leaving the profession or jumping ship and just taking the other job because, there's more money and less hours, please talk to your employer and let them know how you're feeling. And the second thing, employers, like I said, you need to talk to your employees. Don't just assume that they're happy. They may not be. And if you are currently on a contract, I honestly believe never break your contract. If you've signed a 2-year deal and you absolutely hate it, you can't stand it, start putting out feelers, look for other jobs. I've got a group called the Podiatry Business Spartans, and I know all the podiatrists that are in that particular group all employ people, great podiatrists, have great businesses, and are great employers. And they really look after their team. So before you jump ship and before you get out of the profession, I'll tell you now, there are a lot of podiatrists out there who are looking for people to join their team who will really, really look after you. I hope you've enjoyed these 2 episodes. I hope it's got everybody thinking a little bit. The feedback so far has been absolutely fantastic from everybody. It's probably, like I said, it's probably been the fastest downloaded podcast, and I hope this episode is as well. And I hope I didn't rave on or rant too much towards the end here. I really want everybody to start just being nice to each other. It's one of those things where Nicole Friel said that her people that actually work with her are almost like her family, and you really, really need to look after your team that way. And if they don't feel like they're part of your team, I have had people that worked with me in the past that would come to work and they really didn't have anything to do with me or anybody else in the business, and they never really lasted very long. The people that really embraced what we were trying to do and wanted to get to know us, and we wanted to get to know them, we end up working together for years. So one last thing I just want to say before I finish up is I am planning on doing probably July, August. I will put something on the Podiatry Business Owners Club. By the way, if you're not in the Podiatry Business Owners Club on Facebook, come on over. All you got to do is answer 3 simple questions and you're in. If you don't answer the questions, then I won't let you in. I will send you a message to answer the questions. But I am going to do a 4-week live training called about how to attract and retain podiatry talent. So keep your ears out on that. I will be posting something shortly. And if you want to know a little bit more about it before I even post, please just send me an email, tf@tysonfranklin.com, and I'll send you a little bit more information. So, like I said, I hope you enjoyed these 2 episodes. Let me know what you think, and that's pretty much for me. So I want you to look after yourself, look after your family, look after your team, look after every single person that's in your life, and I will talk to you again next week. Bye for now.